All right, so hello and welcome to the Irish Goodbye Business Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to interview my great friend, Laura Chambers here. So the premise of the Irish Goodbye Business Podcast is we're interviewing real people with real experience to understand what they've learned, what their journey's been, and what nuggets and wisdom they would pass on to other people in business as they go on their own journeys. So Laura, welcome and thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Laura, you and I go way back many years now. I probably prefer not to disclose exactly how many years it's been since we were both at university together. But you've been a great friend over many years, and I'm very excited for this session today to understand more about what your career journey's been and what you've learned along the way. So why don't we start by just giving us a bit of a background on your career history and what you've been up to.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. So yeah, I had the delight of going to university to do events management. I'd originally gone to Leicester University, which is in the Midlands in the UK, to do communications and sociology. Hated Leicester, hated the course, and then went on a Volvo car launch in Geneva in Switzerland with my mother, and realised there was lots of young people having a great time organising events. And the light bulb went off. I want to do this. So I decided to do the event management degree, met your great self. We had the fortunate chance of doing a placement year during that course, which was great. But left university with a plan to go off and work for IMG World. That was the big plan. And I don't know if you remember this, but I deferred my graduation so that I could get the American visa. And that was the big plan. In between there, my age was probably around 21, 22. I met various individuals in my life, and one of those happened to be somebody who I was romantically linked with, but then another was a gentleman who was setting up a business at the time. And I met him over dinner. And I was kind of running my mouth and saying, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm great at all these things, yada, yada. And at the time, he said, oh, I'll help you on that path, but will you come and work for me in the interim? And I was like, oh, okay, what is it? And he said, oh, I'm setting up a cosmetic surgery company. And I was like, oh, thank you, that's very kind, but no, thank you. And then very early on in my career, Brian, I realised that money can be a real motivator. So when an amount of money is presented to you and said, I'll pay you this much to come and do it, the answer was quite a quick yes. And so from a personal perspective, I wasn't overly interested at a young 20s in private health, aesthetic, elective surgery. But it was an opportunity to go and do something that was really entrepreneurial. At the time, there was some serious investors who just threw what to them was a chunk of change in for us to really get going and hit the ground running. And it was a very ambitious business plan to become market leader in the UK as a large cosmetic surgery provider. This was in the north of England, and that was a whirlwind 7 years where I went from project manager for launch to marketing manager, and then I closed out at 28, 29 as director of business services. And so that mindset in that company was really highly ethical in terms of we respected the nature of what the business did, which was take people and care for them and take their money for that privilege. But it was also startup culture. Nobody really knew what the right path was to do it. And so it was like, have a go. And that level of trust in somebody in their early 20s was just unbelievable, really. And the amount of exposure you have, you're in every board meeting, you're around the shareholders, you're setting up call centres, you're building clinics, literally building chairs in clinics, because whatever job was needed is what you did. It was an exciting company, it was an exciting time, went through lots of market conditions that could never have been anticipated, one of them being the financial crash of 2008. But at the time, our competitors were very debt leveraged, whereas we weren't. We were still in startup phase, and that allowed us to circumvent that situation in a way that they couldn't. And so a lot of the market conditions that we had were really great tailwinds that allowed us to become market leader. After 7 years, I was very much in a mindset of I'm a big fish in a small pond. Nobody wants my job. there isn't really anywhere for me to go. The exit plan had shifted a little, which was totally understandable because the business was really profitable. But I kind of felt like I was getting itchy feet and what was next, and do I really know as much as I think I know, given the hierarchy of what was seemingly a small company. And I wanted to leave and test myself. And I think this is a trend, and I've challenged myself quite a lot recently on this, is am I a quitter, or do I just know when the time is ready to go? And I think with that one, I'm fiercely loyal, and so the idea of leaving that company and going anywhere else immediately felt too much, because I put so much heart and soul into that company. You know, I really cared about it and still do, that the idea of leaving and going somewhere else was just not really tenable. So I've always kind of had buffers and built myself some time to really sort of sit in the discomfort of not knowing what comes next, rather than jumping to the next branch whilst firmly clinging on to the old one. And not many people do that. Most people need that security of firmly letting go of the last one when they've got the grip on the new one. And lots of people are like that with men too. But
that's a different subject for a different podcast.
That analogy works. But yeah, so then left there, and then quite quickly was, you know, back on the America vibe, which is funny. You know, and we'll get to that at the end. But back on the America vibe was very much, I want to work for an American company. I want my path to get me there. And I was based in the north of England, in a metropolitan city called Leeds, which is great, but technically I filtered it down. There was about 3 companies that had offices in Leeds. And then I had a blind spot, because the very next day, a recruiter called me from that were interested in you for a role. And I was like, well, where is it? And they said Leeds. And I was like, not in Leeds. And that was kind of my wake-up call in terms of how, as a company, J&J can function. And so it had various other companies under its umbrella. So very, very, very big healthcare company, happened to have a site in the part of town where I was, and took a role with them. So from small healthcare startup to big American corporate in my hometown, which was kind of ideal and unbelievable. Cut forward 11 years, I did probably 7 or 8 different roles. I loved how that company kind of gave you assignments. So this is your next assignment. And I think when you can apply that mindset, and I think this is good advice to anybody, if you apply that mindset of my next assignment is, and I think in a learning environment, you're like, okay, what's the next module? What's the next thing I need to get done to get to the end goal of I've learned? And so I think the culture there was very much, okay, so here's your assignment, off you go. And I had some unbelievable line managers. And I think I was just fortunate to have a lot of trust in me. Like, we don't know how to do it either, off you go. And so I think you build a lot of resilience, and you build confidence when you do go away and you get things done. But I think that mindset of an assignment really helps, because you're never really in it for that long. And there were some people in big corporates who do sit in the same job for a very, very long time. But I was fortunate to work for a company that really encouraged that you could be in finance, and if you had aspirations to go into marketing, if you had the right sponsors and pathway, you could kind of get there. And I think I was able to leverage those networks and relationships really, really well. So fast forward to where I am now. I left that company in December. I think I'm now 42. My life is a bit different.
Sorry, Laura, when you did leave that company, what position were you in when you exited that organization?
So at the time of joining, I was responsible. I was in a European role. So again, that's quite different to go from, instead of entering into a country role, I went into a regional role, and then you have global roles.
Yep.
So I was in at a regional level, which again is not necessarily the obvious route. Most people do country, get the market experience first,
yep,
and then go into a regional role.
And a region is multiple countries.
Yeah, Europe, Middle
Yep.
East, and Africa.
Yeah.
I was in a European role, different European roles for 7 years. One of them being the last one that I did before I had children was head of customer experience and events. So the event kind of came full circle. And I do think, I don't know if you find this, but the discipline that running large scale events gives you plays out in business all the time. You know, the planning, the winning, the execution, you know, that has been a common thread throughout my whole career. But the last role, to answer your question, I was chief of staff for the UK, and then my last role was running the breast care division for them in the UK. So European roles, then UK roles, but essentially head of sales and marketing.
Right. And so would you have a kind of a P&L in that type of position? And when you mentioned customer experience in the role before that, what does customer experience mean, perhaps for someone who's listening that might not? Yeah, it's a very broad term, but what does that particularly mean?
Yeah, and I think now it's perhaps more in you get CX and UX and all this kind of acronyms of it. But I think in its simplest of terms, somebody's being paid to do a job, you're paying for a service or a product. The nicer that interaction can be, the better everybody can feel, is my view. So if I was a cocktail waitress, I would try my absolute hardest to be the best cocktail waitress I could be. I'd be polishing the bar, I'd be polishing the spoons, I'd be looking for the opportunity to service the next customer. You know, in corporate world, depending on the client base, I think sometimes we lose sight of that, especially the larger you grow, is that, you know, if you're expecting people to travel to an event, you know, they need to leave their home, they need to get to their local airport, they need to get from the inbound airport to the venue, they need to know what's going on, they need to know what the agenda is, they need to know where they can eat, they need to know their dietary requirements. All of those things can be really fractious, or they can be really nice. And I think that is something that I just firmly believe in it as a core value. If you're being paid to do something and somebody's parting with their money or their time, make it nice.
My dad always said to me, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing properly. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to there. You know, as you talk about that, you know, people attending these and events are a big part of the technology industry. We have annual flagship events where we'll have tens of thousands of people typically coming to San Francisco or different locations where they'll learn more about the product. And it's a huge selling event, very important to the brand, very important for the representation of the brand. It's probably no surprise here if I say that you've always been quite a good planner, Laura. So this might have been, you know, you might have been born to do it. But within that delivery model, there's so many stakeholders and so many things that are happening. So how do you manage all of those stakeholders, those threads? How do you keep everyone happy, and is that possible?
I think that's a really great question. I think it's about skin in the game and, you know, really setting a vision.
What does that mean?
So I think a vision and a tone for what's the mission. I've always, again, sort of an assignment has an end to it. A mission, you either get there or you don't. And I think with collaboration of multiple stakeholders, it's that first rallying to get them on board, and then it's the skin in the game, what's in it for them. So this is where we are, this is where we're trying to get to, and this is the role that you play in getting us from here to here. Do we think that do we agree with where we are now? Do we agree that it would be better if we get to where we want to go? Yes. Do you understand your roles and responsibilities within that? And do you understand, you know, perhaps the reward and recognition if we get there, or what it would mean if we get there, or actually if we don't get there, there might be another consequence that none of us want to happen. So it's the different levers, but I also think events should be fun. I'm sure your sales events are quite fun, you know, so the people should enjoy the planning process, the build up, and the intimacy that you can get from, you know, delegate management. It sounds so boring, but actually, you know, if the key person at your event will have interacted with so many people at perhaps a junior level for them to get there and do what they need to do, that the interpersonal relationships that they have are really meaningful. And for somebody perhaps at a junior level to interact with arguably the most senior stakeholders there, yanks everything together. And I think that team spirit at the end of we're all kind of crawling on the floor tired. I remember being pregnant with my first son, in heels, quite heavily pregnant, doing back-to-back events in Germany. I was like, just can't fly home. And everyone was like, well, what are you doing? But I think it's the mission, and, you know, I could physically stand, therefore I could physically do something. And I think that's just kind of the mindset of I'd initiated this thing, I'm going to see it through. And I think if you're nice to people and you make them understand what that vision is and what's in it for them, they can take pride in the work of getting there.
I think that, it's really interesting that you say that. I think that thoroughness, following something through to the end, following up on things, I think there's a skill that you talk about there that's really important. And it doesn't matter whether you're selling something, whether you're delivering an event, or
do what you say you're going to do.
Do what you say you're going to do when you said you're going to do it. And I think oftentimes people, because things don't always go well. And I think what happens sometimes in that situation is people are sometimes scared to deliver bad news, or they haven't got an update, or maybe they don't have information. So I find for myself, when I'm managing a project or trying to see something through to completion, if I've committed to giving someone an update by a certain time, even if I don't have an update because I'm not in receipt of the information that was needed, I try and make a point to communicate with them and say, I'm sorry, I said I was going to get back to you on this day. I don't have an update, but I am still working on it. So at least you're delivering the communication, and people know, okay, well, Brian's on top of it, or Laura's on top of it, and it's being worked on. So I think oftentimes people are scared to deliver bad news. They sort of disappear off a cliff, or fall into the abyss and just don't communicate when things start to get a little bit hairy. And I think that can be really.
It's also taking the time to say the why. So, I've worked in heavily regulated industry, still kind of do. And people sometimes don't understand the rule book, including people inside the corporation, doing their jobs well. They don't really understand that why. And that was something I used to say a lot to friends and colleagues in compliance. I'm like, if you just took the time to really explain what worst case scenarios might be, people would take it a little bit more seriously, or they would pay it more than lip service. And I think it's that why. So I said I'd come back to you with an update. I haven't got an update. I just wanted to let you know I'm still working on it, and here's the reason why I don't have an update.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to do about it. Because I think sometimes, I think you're absolutely right. Deliver the bad news, deliver it quickly. Just be brutally honest. It's people's time is precious too. But then why can't you do that?
I think you make a really interesting point there. The question why is a really powerful question. And I had an old boss of mine who was fantastic, and because you can apply it on it's not just why something may be going off the rails, or perhaps it's why you haven't got an update for someone, but when you're in a meeting with someone and someone is stating the mission or stating a business objective that they have, that they want you to meet or deliver to, the most powerful question that you can ask is why. And my old boss in question, a guy called John Steinberg, he used to say it like 3 times in a row. I'd be like, why? But he would just keep going. But it forces someone to really articulate the reason and the rationale behind the objective or the initiative or whatever it is that they're working on. So that question, the simple question, is a really, really powerful one as a question, and also as a justification, as you articulate when you're communicating in any kind of forum.
Yeah, I think with children, I like to sort of reinforce everything's fixable, everything's solvable, and they like to test that theory with handing me something that's fundamentally broken that I can't fix. But I like to wrap around it. But the problem of the broken pen is we can get another one, so the problem is solvable. And I think when I first joined big healthcare, and this has been true throughout my whole career, people have come to me with a problem, and I'll be like, okay. And I think some of it's neurodiversity, some of it's just I have no idea what I'm doing, but somebody has said that I am in charge here, so I best get to the root cause of it. And I used to go to the printer and I get a giant piece of A3 out, and I'd drag people into a meeting room in a nice way and be like, talk me through. And I would draw a box and like the problem, and then we'd write the problem. And I was like, and who's involved? And it's like the stakeholders, and who have we spoken to already? These people. Okay, and where is the problem stuck? Here. And is that a rule, or or a standard, or a principle? What's getting in our way? And do we just need to respect it and find another way, or can we bash down what the barrier is? And I think just sometimes that common, not knowing all the ins and outs, allows you to take a real common sense approach. I think generally in large corporations, leadership up here kind of trust the layers in the organization, that they know the detail, and that someone will try and have that pragmatic conversation. And if those pragmatic conversations are really honest, then I think everything kind of works. But I think it's when all the information isn't available, or things are withheld, that things get a bit murky, because the people that are doing and the leadership are not necessarily on the same page. But I used to call it project same page, like get me on the same page as you lot so that I can help you.
I love it. And I think you articulate something really, really important there, because I think often some people might see something difficult or an obstacle that sits in front of them, and they're sort of like, well, I don't know how to do it. What I just, throw their hands up and perhaps give up, or not know how to go forward. And as you say, breaking a problem down into little pieces or parts, why is this happening? Who do we need to speak to? Why are they saying no? What's the obstacle? There's some really fundamental questions in that. Who, why, what, where, when, how, those kind of open questions really help you to get to the root cause of the constituent parts that might be obfuscating the mission, as you articulate, which I think is really really integral. Who's the blocker? Why are they blocking it? What do we need to do?
And the blocker might not be a person. The blocker might be the rule book.
Yeah.
Or it might be a law in a different country, or it might be just because it's a customer issue. It's not necessarily always, I don't want to frame it that it was internal people getting in the way. It's really trying to understand, okay, why are we stuck? And I think just thinking about work from home, kind of imagining those sort of project same page days, a lot of the benefit, and it was a large multinational company, was the people that you needed to get to were in the building, and you could essentially go to the room and be like, hello, please can I talk to you today? And I think that did really change, that the resilience to go hunting for people virtually is a bit harder.
Oh, Laura's coming.
Very much what people's reaction.
No, good stuff. That's really that can really be applied across any business and any problem, whether it's people, persons, circumstances.
I had an amazing boss, and I would say he was probably the brightest person I've ever worked for. But my style and his style were just really different. But the good intention was there from day one, and he'd already shown, the data was there that he backed me. But I'm quite a people pleaser, and so I was like, I need to please this guy. And he would say things, and I was just like, I kind of rate myself as fairly bright. I have no idea what you're talking to. The one that really sticks with me, and John sometimes takes it too, is when going from A to B, never start at A. I was kind of like, oh, okay, where to start? And it was kind of, I'll forget the terminology because there was a bit of a language barrier, but it was like A plus 1. And it was kind of the purpose was like, take a step, take action, do something to get away from A and a little bit further towards a destination that you might fully not have it all figured out. But if you sit and you try and perfect it, you try and make it perfect, and you try and mastermind the whole thing, when you're stuck at A, you won't create that momentum. And I think that has 100% stayed with me in everything that I do.
So really interesting. It's really interesting to hear you say that. And I think I always sort of say perfection is the prohibitor of progress. And in fact, I listened to a presentation by a lady called Carrie Lorenz, who was one of the first, in fact, I think she was the first female Top Gun, F-16 fighter pilot. Amazing lady. And she said, what she said was, you could be on a mission and you're flying it. And she was applying it into a business world, but she said, you'd be flying a mission and you would have comms in the radio. So you might have 4 different voices coming in from the radio. Don't necessarily know which one is right, but if you don't take an action, you're dead. You're compromising the mission, you're dead. So you have to take an action. And if the action's not correct, you take another action, and you take another action, and you keep taking actions until you're on target, until you're in the right space. And I think in business, we see it all the time, especially when we're positioning large transformational projects, and as I'm sure you've been involved in some of those as well, where procrastination sets in, people make it too big, they try and solve for everything, and exactly as you've laid out there, you have to just take an action, keep moving the ball forward, keep making progress, and that's a really important key in any line.
The action could be assemble a meeting tomorrow with identify the key people and assemble a meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
And get some insight, some data from the people who know what they're doing as to what we think the next step. That in itself is an action. But I think you could, and I've seen this in project management so many times where you're planning and planning and planning, and it, you must have this, but waterfall project management versus agile and scrum. They're so different in terms of mindset, and neither one is perfect or terrible, but I think it's just that the idea of sprinting, regrouping, sprint, regroup, and the MVP model just works so much more in terms of there's so much you don't know. Go and get a little bit of information and build out that golden nugget until you form a better view for the next stages, rather than trying to boil the ocean is a very corporate term, but it kind of makes sense that you just try and go too big, to your point, and then getting your way, and you hemorrhage lots and lots of time and money trying to build it, when actually, okay, where are we now? What do we need? Let's go and build a prototype and test and see if it works.
I had a coffee with somebody this morning, a client of mine this morning, and he kind of hit the nail on the head. He said, big meetings are bad, small meetings are good. And he said, small meetings, and as you said, typically small teams are how you get things achieved and how you move things forward. Do you have any thoughts on managing teams? Have you had any challenges around managing teams in your corporate roles historically?
I think in my younger years, my leadership style was perhaps quite performative in terms of what the people above me expected of me, and am I doing what they want me to do? And I think, like most of us, you get older and you form a different view. And so I'm definitely a warmer, softer, more considerate leader as I'm older, as I've gotten older and more experienced. And I think part of that is
we'll ask John, will we?
My style is very direct and let's get stuff done.
Yeah.
But wanting people to enjoy the process of doing that. And I think there's I listen to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, but I think Brene Brown said it really well with the question of, do you genuinely believe that most people are trying their best? And I think if you really sit on that question, I was talking about it today actually, your level of compassion for people is much higher. So if you inherit people, they might not report to you, you might not have hierarchy over them, they might be on your team and you've not recruited them. I think if you start with that mindset of, okay, what can they do? Are they a rock star? Brilliant, right? Pull them in. But actually, everyone's there for a reason, and if they've been there for a long time, they must be okay. What is it? And I think working internationally was a real punch in the face in the best possible way for me, in terms of I just thought my style was effective because I'm kind of like, hi, and I'm a big hugger. And so I just go in and like, okay, this is why I'm here, and this is what we're going to do. And you could just see people like recoil from this abrasive northerner coming into Switzerland and demanding that we hug. And so I think those social norms and social conventions of, it's actually impolite in Switzerland to start talking about work at the first dinner. Whereas I'm kind of like, I'm here for 2 days, like
let's get it done.
And so I think, again, that sort of softening out of like, okay, what we do is important, but it's not that, we're not paramedics, we're not doctors, we're not that important in the grand scheme of things. And there's enough layers in this organization that we do have the gift of some time. And so I think it's how do you look for the best in people? How do you understand their quirks, be that if they're same nationality as you or not? But what is it that you can find the common ground? And then there's it's Gallup, I think, but it was a course I did, and it was called Strength Finders. And the premise is, your son is brilliant at wrestling, if he spent 20 hours a week wrestling, so he loves it, he's good at it, and he's going to apply time, chances are he's going to get really good. Whereas if you asked him to do tap dancing, he's like, I just don't like it. So he doesn't like it, he's not very good at it, but you're going to ask him to do 20 hours of it. You know, what's the best thing that he's going to have the best possible outcomes? It's going to be the wrestling.
Yeah.
So I think if the leader can take time, you know, to break bread and get under the skin of the team, you know, and often in big corporations, you're spending exorbitant amount of time with these people. You're on planes, you're in airports, you know, you're spending time with them. If you can understand, you know, a little bit who they are and what they're good at and what they enjoy, I do think that's a great time investment, because you can see them in the best possible path that they can be in.
I think that's a great statement, and because I think you can fall into the trap of making assumptions about people as well.
Definitely done that a lot.
But you know, it's almost like it's almost sort of akin to, say, a soccer manager or football manager, right? You've got to understand what people's strengths are, how to get them to play to their strengths, and how to get the most out of them. So I think that's sound advice for anyone that's leading or managing teams, and trying to figure that out is an important thing. You know, don't jump to conclusions, don't make assumptions, take the time to figure these things out. I think you make a really interesting point about working and understanding different cultures. I've lived in a few different countries now: Canada, Dublin, UK, and the United States. So worked with many, like yourself, worked with many people from different nationalities and different backgrounds, and there are different ways of doing things in different countries. And I think that getting that understanding is really valuable as well, understanding how different cultures operate and how business gets done in different places. So I think that's a very valuable skill as well. I wanted to bring it back to something that you said as well, that you said you were direct with people, and I think an observation that I've seen in good leadership is typically as people get more and more senior and their time becomes more, I guess, valuable, they have to be more direct, more like, let's get to the point. But I've seen kind of two styles of that leadership historically. Sometimes people are just, they really want to get into it, and they can be quite aggressive, or like very demanding as they sort of lay out their approach. And the better leaders that I've seen, especially at the senior levels, they're direct, but it's not delivered in a way that's sort of condescending or perhaps judgmental or making an assumption, or why don't you understand what I'm saying. And one of the observations that I've made as well is that I think especially sometimes these senior leaders will have an idea in their head and they'll say it, and then often people don't feel like they have the equity to speak up. They were like, oh yeah, okay, and they don't really understand what's been said. So I think it's very important to qualify and clarify sometimes when you hear these things. And I always say, look, I'm sorry, I just don't understand what you said to me. Can you explain it in really simple terms? So I think, not jumping to conclusions with things that have been articulated or conveyed to you, especially at the sort of senior levels.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I've seen it more times than I would want to have seen it, where there's an agreeable room of people not asking the right questions, or meetings that go on for too long because there is too much debate. And so I think they're the different ends of the spectrum. Is no decision is made and many hours have been hemorrhaged, or decisions are made without the challenge of the people that are at the table for a reason, because they're in roles where they're expected to raise their arm if they disagree. And I think when I kind of did a PMO, chief of staff role, which was a really challenging role, I pride myself on being good from the get-go, and with that I just wasn't. I was a solid 6 out of 10, and I was trying really hard. So that was a bit of a derailer for me. But I think by the end of that role, and it was a really tough time to do that role. It was I started in 2019, and then saw through the majority of the pandemic. But it was understanding that my role was the oil in the machine, so it was facilitation. And so being around the most senior leadership was great, because I could see what they needed and how they interacted. But then more junior people would have a meeting with them, and so they'd have spent weeks perhaps preparing for this meeting, and I've like, oh, it's just not going to go in that direction. Like, here's my guidance. And sometimes they wouldn't take the guidance. I just watch with my popcorn. This gets crazy. But most of the time they did, and it was high performance principles was something that I'll take with me for the rest of my working career, and probably in my life, as to, can we all agree on what we think is a good way to do this, and then hold each other accountable that we're going to do it, and have set agendas and reach decisions. And I think that facilitator role is so fluid and wild that you're spotting for things. So does anybody disagree? Because it looks like we're all going to sort of sign off on this, but is there anybody in the room that really disagrees? Barbara, your face isn't saying that you agree. What are you thinking? And so I think when someone's got permission to be in that role, with no conflict, I was definitely significantly junior to everybody else in that room, but it was like I was wearing a badge saying facilitator. She is here to get the outcome at the end of the day, and get the coffees and get the other thing. It was a mad role, but it just was so exposing in terms of, now when I see technically low performance in interactions, I just start clicking, because I'm like, this could be so much better.
Yeah.
If they'd kind of a point, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a full-time role, and it doesn't apply to every organization, but any organization where people are meeting and trying to agree things, the role of the facilitator, if everyone could just say, right, today, Brian, it's you. Your job is to get us over the line. We're here today to discuss this thing and reach a decision. See if you can help us, Brian. Then you kind of tagged in, like, oh, okay, it's my job.
Yeah.
And I think so many organizations would be faster, leaner, and more aligned if they had that facilitator role.
I love that. And I think that's it's really interesting to get that perspective. I think that any organization at any level that's conducting meetings to get to some kind of outcome could benefit from that sort of approach. And it's really interesting to hear you say, the example where you sort of call on Barbara, maybe the body language speaks for itself. So you always want to lean into that and address that, those kind of subliminal cues. The other point that I think is interesting as well, that I think is valuable for anyone that's conducting these meetings, is just because someone's not speaking doesn't mean that they don't have anything to say. Yeah. And I think it's easy to fill up the oxygen. There's a lot of opinionated people in business, for better or worse, and a lot of those opinionated people can be very clever. I have to find myself, I have to stop talking in lots of meetings, because I like to chat and convey my opinion. But it's really important, I think, to call on the people that aren't speaking as well and say, what do you think about this? What's your point of view? Because sometimes they're the smartest people in the room, and they've sat and they've observed the whole thing, and they were like, you guys are crazy. This is what we need to do. And you're like,
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, in most big companies now, there's various ways to profile individuals, and I find that fascinating, the psychometric testing. I think it's really useful. But again, if everyone could wear a badge saying, I'm a yellow red, so I want to please you, but if you don't please me, I might tell you. I think if everyone kind of could wear their badges, it's like, oh, okay. And I think, have we made progress in this in a wider sense of pronouns and neurodiversity and lots of other labels that we can wear? Maybe, I don't know, it's a bigger question. But I think in a work setting, we once had a thing, it was sort of referred to as a recipe. And so what is it? Right, Brian likes English tea. Don't take him a coffee, he doesn't like it. And so, oh, okay, Brian's a big deal. If I get him some tea, that might make things start better. Okay, just small things like that could make everything move faster would be very helpful. And I think in fairness to myself, I can bend that spectrum quite well in terms of the most senior person and trying to treat them like a human. What do you need? What's your objective of today, versus the other people that are involved in the meeting, which is often at a more junior level. Right, what's everyone trying to do? And then watching all of the moving parts. and then trying to get to an outcome, and just sometimes accepting we didn't get to the outcome, but we're going to move on.
Well, let's move on. What do we do about it? And I think that the setting of objectives is something that I see this all the time with internal meetings. An internal meeting will appear on my calendar with a bunch of attendees and a title. Maybe sometimes it's from someone that I've never met before, and there's nothing there's no agenda and there's no objective, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. So unless I've spoken to those people in advance, they know exactly what we're having a call to discuss, I think it's really important to lay out an agenda, to lay out an objective, and especially if you're meeting with customers. Sometimes it could be internal customers, or in my line of business, it's external customers. So always try and make a point of articulating the objective. Here's what we're setting out to achieve, because then there can't be any confusion when you arrive at the call. People can't be like, what am I here? Why are we here? What are we here to discuss? And to your point about keeping things on track, making things go quickly, laying out that agenda and that objective. It seems basic, but I think it's a really important thing that's oftentimes overlooked when it comes to running an efficient meeting.
Yeah, I think, we had something, and I don't know if it's still used. I would definitely, in the right setting, use it again. Sometimes it's administration for the sake of administration, but it was a pre-read, and I've heard that at Amazon they do this. It's like a 45-minute. There's an allocated time at the start of a meeting where people read the pre-diagnosed format of the meeting structure. So everyone kind of sits in silence, reads, and then the meeting can start. So I think it's that kind of format of a pre-read where, okay, what are we trying to do? What's the key information that we have? What do we not have? And what can everybody have a think about this beforehand? And sometimes my role will be like, has everybody read the pre-read? And somebody will, like, okay, no worries. You take 5 minutes now, and you do that so that we can kind of get going. But again, that little bit of naming and shaming or public lashing was always in the most polite way, but always kind of worked to kind of set a standard of like, did we agree, guys, that we were going to do that as a format? Yes. Did you all agree that you would strive to read it ahead of the meeting? Yes. Okay, just checking. And it takes a certain level of experience, I think, to have the confidence to do that with people that are much more senior than you.
I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning of the meeting. So you said when you were talking about your work in the cosmetic industry, you talked about working in a startup and the importance of trust in that business. So you're taking people's money, you're making life-changing, has life-changing implications for them, hopefully in a positive way. And then you also said later on in the meeting, as you went into corporate world, you said you had good managers, and those good managers trusted you to deliver. That idea of trust, I think, is integral to success in business. It's integral to success in relationships. What's your thoughts on that, and what would you say is sort of one of the, whether it's trust, or what would you say is one of the most important things that you've learned in business?
I think trust is important. And I think, again, that kind of believing the best in people before assuming the worst is a better mindset to live by in every walk of life, because I think you'd be twitching at the curtains and assuming a lot of negativity that just isn't there. I just don't think that's good for you. But I think it is getting the measure of people. It's always about the people. Systems and process, brilliant. And I can't picture what the future will look like with the levels of automation that are coming. I just can't picture it yet. But there's still going to be a Brian somewhere that you need to be like, Brian, please, can you do this? And so I think just noticing the people at any level and observing. So I think that would be a key skill that I have, or I've honed. I don't know if it's just, I think as a kid I was kind of like it. I would just watch things and like, why are they doing that and what's going on there? Maybe a bit looking, observing for something negative. Maybe there's something there, but I think it was always just watching people and observing. And I think very much in my corporate career, I felt like an observer of this thing that was an entity that I was very passionate about, cared about it as an entity, and was very, very proud to work there. It was kind of observing it. And I think if you have that ability to understand the cog or the wheel, and you're a very, very, very small cog in a very, very big wheel, but your time in the wheel can be really impactful and really meaningful. But it is ultimately about the people. And I think earlier in my career, I'd been like, is it? Is it? Whereas now I kind of cut me open, I do believe it. That's where the joy is, that's where the challenge is, that's systems and process and rule books and everything else that might get in the way, supply chain, etc. It's just systems and processes. But if you've got decent people in supply chain, you can get it done. If you've got good relationships with people, you can get a huge amount done on relationship alone.
Yeah, relationships are absolutely critical, and I think you to that theme of trust, believe, like you sort of, I think, framed it slightly differently. You believe the best in people, and I think that's an inherent trust or faith that you have in people and their intent to do the right thing. And I think that is coming at any person in any position, especially as you're a leader, with that mindset, I think really would help to shape kind of an empathetic type of interaction with those people.
I think it's also, you and I have talked about this a lot, but I think you're in such disputatious times where it would be so easy to say, well, you're green and I'm purple, and I want you to be purple, and if you're not purple, then we're not friends. Whereas it's way more interesting to be like, why are you green? Like, how have you got there? That is so weird. And embrace it with you're probably a really great person, but your life experience has led you to there, and that form of thinking, as well as a load of other variables that influence our thinking. But I think asking questions and being curious and trying to, again, mean like, oh, I love tea too. Brian, you and I love tea, and you're green and I'm purple, but we both love tea. Should we go and have some tea? Is a nicer way to be. And I think I've softened some of the harshest of people by just asking about their kids and being nice to them.
Yeah, and I think we all need people we need to have differences of opinion. And I think it's important that people have differences of opinion. And it's okay for people to have differences of opinion. It's not a problem. We're fortunate enough to live in countries where you have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of opinion. And it's totally fine for someone to disagree with you. And it's back to that question, well, why do you think like that? And you try and understand people's perspective, and that sort of can change your opinion or change your mind, or maybe it doesn't. But it doesn't mean people have to be aggressive or unkind to each other. It's okay to have differences of opinion. We all still need to get on and make things work. So just lastly here, and Laura, thank you so much for the time. This has been great. It's been really, 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 really interesting. One last question before we go. If you were going to pass on one piece of advice, or you were going to write something on a bar napkin for the next generation of people that are coming through, what would be the guidance, the piece of advice that you would pass on to the next generation?
So I think it's only, this is the context of what I would write, but I think it's only with time and experience that you can look back on chapters.
Yeah.
And so, if I go and volunteer somewhere for 6 months now, and I was leaving a napkin for them. So let's say it's not a corporate beast or business, but I'm just going to go do something for 6 months, and I think it's make that time count.
Right.
Leave a mark, get stuff done, and do it in as nice a possible way as you can.
Yeah.
Because it's once I've gone after the 6 months, it's the interconnections with the people and the work that we did together that is left. There is really no legacy to my work that is tangible.
Right.
And so it's a memory and a feeling. And do you remember when we did that? Do you remember we actually got that done? Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And then they dismantled it. And it's like, and then someone threw it in the bin. Can you remember? I think you just have to have that resilience to be like, someone's probably going to change us again, and that's up to them. But
Yeah.
for now, we're taking this course of action, and you know, leave a mark, get stuff done, but be nice to each other.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for the time. This has been great. I really appreciate it and look forward to catching up with you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.